Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. Were war crimes committed during the lopsided war between Hamas and Israel, which began 1 year ago? Well, a recent UN-sponsored report pointed to serious violations of international law on both sides. But how credible were those findings? My guest today, William Schabas, chaired the Commission of Inquiry into the Gaza war until he quit under heavy fire from Israel. What does the Schabas saga say about the effort to apply international justice in the Middle East? William Schabas, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
The Committee of Inquiry I just referred to issued its report a couple of weeks ago. You chaired that inquiry for some time and then you resigned. But do you share the conclusions that they reached?
Yes, I do. I'm very content with the report. I might have had, if I'd been involved in it, I might have tweaked a word here or there, or perhaps even wanted to address some issues in a slightly different way, but one can only second guess that sort of thing. As it stands, I think it's an excellent report. It's a very useful contribution, and hopefully it's going to move this agenda forward.
Do you think your involvement in the process, and much of the sort of groundwork for that report had been done while you were chairing it, do you think that your involvement casts a real long shadow over the whole process?
No, it's a short shadow, not a long one. I worked on the fact-finding part of the commission. I chaired it for the first 6 months. And then I dropped out. I think that the allegations about me are unfounded, and most serious people who have looked at them realize that there's just not much there. It's a very thin reed on which to base an attack on the commission. But that being said, the commission and the writing of the report went on, and everybody knows this, without my involvement. I had not seen a sentence of a draft report when I left. And
no,
so,
but I guess the point is that a lot of the fact-finding had been done under your chairmanship. And
sure.
we know from Israeli sources who've been quoted in the Israeli press that they are going to cite that if there is ever any attempt to build any sort of legal case against Israel with regard to what happened in Gaza a year ago. They're going to cite your involvement as one reason why the case should not carry any credibility.
Yeah, but they don't have a strong argument there, because the work that went on in the 6 months that I was there was one of fact-finding. The facts in this commission, the facts that were gathered, which are referred to in the report, are by and large things that are in the public domain. They're well known. As the commission itself was not able to get onto the territory. It wasn't as if there were a long string of confidential hearings where it got all kinds of confidential information. This stuff is public knowledge. Many of and the work of the commission was carried on in the light of day. It's based on a lot of other documentation that's available, open source, publicly on the internet. So I think if someone wanted to claim that, they'd have to show that there were ways in which I had in some way perverted the work of the commission, and that can't be done.
I suppose what I'm getting to, though, is whether perhaps with the gift of hindsight, whether you now acknowledge it would have been so much better and wiser if you'd never accepted the appointment as chairman of this Commission of Inquiry in the first place.
You know, that was a difficult decision when I was appointed. It was clear that there was going to be a storm around my appointment.
Well, was it very clear to you that there was going to be a storm?
Not the second I was appointed, but within a couple of hours it was pretty clear that there was going to be quite a storm. And it went on for a little while.
You knew better than anybody what your involvement in Israel-Palestine was. You knew that you'd been outspoken on several occasions in public about, for example, your feeling that you'd like to see Benjamin Netanyahu in the dock at the International Criminal Court. I mean, with all of your legal training and expertise, that surely told you that there was at least the appearance of prejudice, of partiality on your part.
Well, what it was that there was a hook for an attack. But I soon learned.
It's
no.
for instance, I mean, you know, any legal observer will tell you that if a quasi-judge, somebody supposed to be neutral at the head of a commission of inquiry, is on the record said things like, "I'd love to see Netanyahu in the dock of the International Criminal Court," he is hardly impartial.
No, it isn't a question of someone who lacks impartiality. There was nothing that I did while I was on the commission that suggested any lack of impartiality. These are things that create a concern that there might be a lack of impartiality, and that's a different thing than saying that it shows that someone's not impartial. People are very capable of putting their opinions to one side and getting on with the job they have to do. Journalists do it all the time. Journalists have opinions. Journalists have made public statements. Some of them have been involved in politics, and they put them aside to do their job in a professional, impartial, and objective manner.
Indeed they do, but journalists don't carry the weight of responsibility that you, as chairman of this UN-sponsored committee of inquiry, carried, and that is a big difference.
But you're asking me why, when the work started, I didn't immediately resign or step aside. I was reassured by the president of the Human Rights Council that he was very confident in the fact that I was leading the commission. I met shortly afterwards with European diplomats, with diplomats from other countries, and they expressed full support for the commission.
Right, but to be very clear, did you tell the head of the Human Rights Council and these other people that you've referred to, did you tell them openly and explicitly that, I think it was in 2012, you had accepted $1,300 in payment from the PLO for some legal consultation work you did for them?
No, I didn't.
Why didn't you
be
upfront about that?
Yeah, you have to understand how the appointment process took place. I received a phone call asking me if I'd be available to work on the commission, and I said to them, yes, I would. I'd be happy to do it. And that was the extent of it. There was it wasn't a vetting process like when you're appointing a justice to the United States Supreme Court. And quite frankly, I don't think the fact that I did an opinion for the Palestinian Liberation Organization 3 years ago is a significant fact in affecting my independence or impartiality.
I'm amazed that you don't. You said genuinely really don't.
Lawyers do this all the time. I'm in the field of human rights. The whole world knows that. That's why I was appointed to chair this commission. I've spent my career attacking not just Benjamin Netanyahu, but attacking George Bush, attacking Tony Blair, attacking Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka, attacking Ahmadinejad in Iran. That's what I do. That's my career.
How much time did you spend attacking Hamas or the Palestinian Authority's record of failing to keep a lid on militant attacks? How much
I have regularly spoken before I was appointed to the commission about the situation in Palestine. I was speaking about it in the context of the International Criminal Court, and I always said that I thought that the rocket attacks by Hamas were likely to lead to prosecutions at the International Criminal Court. So I've never pulled my punches on that.
Lord Panic QC, a very experienced lawyer here in the UK, he said, of your case, he said, the appearance of bias is enough to disqualify a person. There is no need to show actual bias. In fact, there may not be any actual bias in the work done at all, but the appearance is the problem.
No, that's
and
the
for
point.
you, there was an appearance problem.
No, that's the point I was making before. There was a charge of an appearance of bias, and by and large, it came from a very small group of people who were themselves so distorted in their vision of the conflict and so supportive of Israel that I don't think they were themselves in a position to take a reasoned, objective view of it. I received that attack from other people besides David Panic, and I know who those people were, and they were people who had taken a position supportive of Israel. And so it didn't really convince me very much. That's not, the test is a reasonable, objective person going to have a suspicion of bias.
So why didn't you have the strength of your convictions and carry on with the job then? Because after 6 months you walked out.
Yeah, I can explain that very clearly. What happened after 6 months was that there was a new attack about this opinion I had done for the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 2012.
Yeah, paid work. You've done paid work for the PLO.
Exactly. I'm a professional. I do paid work for all kinds of people. And they had asked me to do an opinion for them. I'm not their lawyer. I'm not working for them on a weekly basis or anything like that. I did one small legal opinion about what the consequences would be of them.
I'll come back to the point. And you think it's
but I want to
okay.
answer. But let me answer the question. Let me answer the question, because what then happened was, Israel made a formal complaint to the Human Rights Council, and the president of the council said, "We're going to have an inquiry now into this. We're going to ask for a legal opinion, and then we'll investigate it." This was now the beginning of February. We were supposed to finalize our report within the next 3 or 4 weeks and finish it and present it to the Human Rights Council. And this was something I was led to believe was going to take a matter of weeks. So I was in the way. There's no doubt about it. This inquiry, I didn't see how the inquiry into my independence and impartiality could continue as long as I remained on the commission. I had to get out of the way.
I mean, you've talked about, I think the word you've used is vilification. You've talked about the campaign against you. We remember the full-page ads in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal condemning you, talking about your bias. I believe also you had personal emails, you had threats. Did it get to a point where you could just stand it no longer?
Well, we can all speculate about that, but I certainly...
Well, nobody would know better than you.
Well, I have scars up and down my back. Those attacks, I mean, you mentioned those ads in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. They were absurd, but they were insulting and they were harmful and they were dishonest. They accused me of being a friend of Ahmadinejad and a supporter of Iran, when in fact I've spent so much of my own efforts campaigning against that terrible regime in Iran. That being said, I lasted 6 months. I was prepared to stay on, but there was a point where the commission needed to get on with its work, and I was an obstacle.
Understood. Did you get death threats?
Yes.
From whom?
I don't know. I don't know. I got a letter from here in the UK. It was investigated by the police. I got a letter with seeds taped to the back of it and threatening to murder me with a virus. I got all kinds of hate mail.
Did you, when you thought about the scale of the campaign against you, did you believe it was organized, it was concerted in some way?
I don't know. I don't know how much of it's just spontaneous. There are a lot of lunatics out there who get involved in attacking, who are, you know, lone actors but have very strong views, and they saw me. I'm accessible. I don't hide where I am. My email is available, my address is available, and you know, I can't say I wasn't concerned. But I bore the pain for 6 months, and I was prepared to keep doing it, I believe.
But you didn't in the end because you felt it was better for the inquiry if you walked away. But
yeah.
And I want to get back to the inquiry and what we can learn from.
But can I say just one more thing about that?
Go on.
I also said that I thought in leaving at this point, because Israel had made it clear that they were going to attack the commission because of me, that I was making the target smaller. I was making it harder to hit.
By walking away?
Yes.
Let's just talk about the Human Rights Council generally, because you know Israel accuses that council of being fundamentally biased against its interests. They point to one basic statistic, that over the last 10 years, there have been 61 different condemnations and resolutions directed against Israel. Only 55 against the rest of the world combined, 15 against Syria, 8 against North Korea. That just seems fundamentally unfair.
Sure. Well, I'm glad now we've moved. That's a separate issue, and it's important to keep them distinct. One of the reasons I was being attacked, I was just a lightning rod for attacks on the Human Rights Council and more generally on the United Nations.
But do you think they've got a point when they say that
Yes.
the Human Rights Council is biased against Israel?
They have a point that there's a distortion in the attention given by the Human Rights Council and the number of resolutions that are directed at Israel. There's a point there. But it's more complex than that. The Human Rights Council, first of all, does a huge amount of work. The bulk of the work of the Human Rights Council is not about adopting those resolutions. So when you hear Netanyahu, you have the impression that they sit there in Geneva day after day adopting resolutions in Israel. That's not what happens. They spend most of their time reviewing the human rights record of every country in the world, and there Israel gets 193rd of the attention. They get the same amount as everybody else. They have other activities where they look at a huge range of human rights violations. So it gives a distorted picture, but there's another point. There's another council in the United Nations, the Security Council, and Israel gets a soft ride in the Security Council for reasons that I'm sure are well known to everybody who's watching this show, because they have a big protector there at the United Nations Security Council. There's a distortion there that Israel doesn't complain about because it's to Israel's benefit. My own thesis...
I mean, if you say it's a distortion, but to point to what you call a distortion in one area doesn't justify a distortion in another, does it?
I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just saying that this is a phenomenon within the United Nations. It's full of double standards, and they don't just work against Israel, they also work in favor of it. And maybe the distortion in the Human Rights Council is because it's an outlet by states that are frustrated with what's going on in the Security Council.
Let me just stop for 1 second, because my producer's quite rightly pointing out that when I said 55 condemnations and resolutions against Israel, the number is actually 61, so I've underplayed it. Do you mind if I'm just going to record the question again, because I want to get the facts absolutely right. Your answer was terrific, but I want to get the facts right. So I'll just ask the question, then we'll move on. Let's just talk about the Human Rights Council generally, because you know Israel accuses that council of being fundamentally biased against its interests. They point to one basic statistic, that over the last 10 years, there have been 61 different condemnations and resolutions directed against Israel. Only 55 against the rest of the world combined, 15 against Syria, 8 against North Korea. That just seems fundamentally unfair. Right, well, you've answered that, so do you mind? We'll move on. In substance, one of the biggest problems that the Human Rights Council has, and that you encountered when you were still chair of the inquiry, is that Israel won't cooperate. So the fact is, this inquiry, however in-depth it wanted to be, it didn't get access to Gaza, it didn't get access to Israel's military and political leadership. It was not an investigation that could, frankly, ever really be credible.
Well, you've made a conclusion based on certain assertions, and let me question the assertions you've made, that it didn't get access to Gaza, it didn't get access to Israel. That's not correct. The Commission wasn't allowed to travel there. We weren't allowed to go into Gaza, we weren't allowed to go into Israel, we weren't allowed to go into the West Bank. But we met many, many people from there who came and spoke to the Commission. In that sense, it wasn't really very different than if we'd gone on the ground and met them in a hotel or a hall.
You've got no cooperation from the Israeli military.
Well, I think the Israelis may be not quite stating it properly either, because we had contacts from people, lawyers who worked with Israel, lawyers who'd been employees of the Israeli Defense Forces, who came and contacted the Commission out of the blue saying they'd like to provide the Commission with information. So in fact, Israel did find a way to get its side of the story. I think it could have done a better job of it. I think that was to its own, it was its own problem doing that. I think it's a weakness. I think they would have been wise to do it. Well, but now you linked that to the credibility. You said that means that the Commission isn't credible. But the facts in the report of the Commission of Inquiry are a matter of public record, and most of them are not contested.
See, when people look at the report in Israel, the thing I think that they mind most about it is that they see there is no attempt to draw any difference between the intent of Hamas militants who were firing rockets indiscriminately into Israel and the intent of the air and ground forces that Israel employed inside Gaza. Is it your contention that intent doesn't matter?
Well, it's not quite intent. We use intent in a technical criminal law sense. Everybody acted intentionally in the sense that they meant the consequences of what they did. But the Commission isn't concerned with the political motivation. It's a Commission of Inquiry set up by the Human Rights Council, and it's concerned with whether there are violations of human rights and of the laws of armed conflict, of humanitarian law, but it doesn't concern itself with the political motivation behind that. Absolutely right.
But there was another group who went in to report on what happened in Gaza a year ago. They called it the high-level military group. Now, it was allied to interests that were in Israel who wanted them to come. They were all either senior ex-politicians from Western countries or military chiefs from Western countries, including the UK and Germany. And one of their body, Colonel Richard Kemp, he came away as part of the report that was written saying, frankly, that he could exonerate Israel from international law violations. He also said this, he said, it is as though the drafters of the UN report believe that any civilian death in war must be illegal, de facto.
The report doesn't say that, obviously. The report acknowledges that civilians get killed in armed conflict as a result of lawful military activity.
And that is precisely Israel's case, that they went to extraordinary lengths to try and avoid civilian casualties. You know all about the leaflet drops, the text messages, the so-called bizarre sort of knock-on-roof dummy bombs that were dropped to try and get civilians to leave areas where the Israelis were going to launch an assault.
The Commission talks about that, of course. And first of all, it acknowledges that Israel makes these efforts So it's not as if it ignores the fact that Israel is attempting to warn people to get out of harm's way. But there were cases that are referred to in the report where whole families were given very short warnings, a minute or two, to get out. They were not able to do it. A mother alone with a large family of little children has a minute or two to evacuate her house and get away before a missile strike. And so the commission said, this isn't working. They said, Israel says they're giving the warnings, but if they're generally going to try and deliver what they say they want to do, which is to protect civilians, they have to do a better job of it. So that's not denying that Israel's doing it. The commission, and this is one of its strengths, it acknowledges this is a nasty war. It's a nasty war and nasty things were done by both sides, and it acknowledges that and deals with it. How credible is an account that says one side blameless, never did a thing wrong, and the other side evil, nasty people?
No, but this isn't
that's biblical stuff. That's not real life.
Understood, but this isn't a question of being blameless. This is a question of whether international laws were violated in a significant way which could amount to war crimes or crimes against humanity. And you appear to be saying that there is as much evidence, if not more, that Israel needs to answer those questions as the militants firing the rockets from Gaza.
Well, yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and there are many examples in the report that the report discusses. There's the case of the warnings, where they acknowledge, first of all, that the warnings are inadequate. And the death toll shows it. We're talking about 14, I forget the exact numbers, 1,400, 1,500 Palestinian non-combatants, civilians, little children killed, and 6 Israelis.
299 Palestinian women, 551 children, the best count of how many were killed during the Operation Protective Edge.
And
but in your view, that by definition means that Israel has a case to answer at the ICC, does it?
No, I didn't say that. But what I said is that the Commission spoke about the conduct of Israeli forces and said, for example, that there's significant evidence of the fact that the people who were the warnings, the roof knocking that they call it, where they launch a little missile and it lands on the roof, telephone calls, text messages, were inadequate. There's another thing that they point to that I would have thought this commission of generals and everything would have looked at, which is what they call the Hannibal Directive. And this is when a prisoner is taken, in this case it was an Israeli prisoner, and Israel goes in, all guns blaring, disproportionate damage. They kill, they destroy and damage at all costs, even if it puts the life of their own soldier at risk, to avoid a soldier being captured. And they claim that that exception to the principle of proportionality in military activity is justified. But there's a problem there, because it's not a military justification, it's a political one. They don't want the prisoner to be captured because of political fallout. And so it violates the rule against proportionality, which is a fundamental rule of international law, of the law of armed conflict.
Before we end, I do need to ask you just a little bit more about the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague. You once said, look, let's be realistic. The ICC is a political process. It's not all about the law, it's about politics as well. So are you prepared to tell me there's actually, realistically, no prospect whatsoever of either, frankly, Hamas or Israel appearing in that dock in The Hague?
I think there's a prospect that both could appear in the dock at The Hague. The prosecutor has, from this report, I think, a good case for claiming that there's a reasonable basis to proceed. And the prosecutor then has to ask the judges for permission and then carry out an investigation. It may not be entirely about the Gaza war. She may, for example, with regard to Israel, look at the settlements, which are unlawful, which have been condemned even by the United States, and she may decide to prosecute that. I don't know, but she's a person of great integrity, independence, and impartiality, and she'll take a decision according to law and based on the facts.
All right. William Schabas, I thank you very much for being on Hard Talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.